U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is showing no signs of backing down from his tariff threat. Speaking to NBC News, Trump defended his plan to tax all goods from Canada and Mexico.
I'm a big believer in tariffs. I think tariffs are the most beautiful word. I think they're beautiful. It's going to make us rich. We're subsidizing Canada to the tune of over $100 billion a year. We're subsidizing Mexico for almost $300 billion. We shouldn't be subsidizing. Why are we subsidizing these countries? If we're going to subsidize them, let them become a state. We can't have open borders. And I said to the president of Mexico and to Justin Trudeau, if it doesn't stop, I'm going to put tariffs on your country at about 25%.
Now, today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau admitted again that would be devastating for the Canadian economy, but he says there is still time to change Trump's mind.
One of the most important things for us to do is not to freak out, not to panic. Now, knowing that, yes, these would be absolutely devastating means we have to take them seriously, but it does mean we have to be thoughtful and strategic, not go around making our opponent's arguments for him, but making our arguments in a significant and united way.
Okay, we're going to bring in the power panel, who will hopefully be thoughtful and strategic and not freak out. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And here with me in the studio, Vandana Cotter is a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Rob Russo is a former CBC parliamentary bureau chief, now the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Rob, let's start with you. There was a lot in what Trump had to say.
Right.
Subsidizing Canada $100 billion. That's the trade deficit. They buy a lot of oil and energy from Canada. That's not a subsidy. That is commercial trade in highly valuable commodities across the border. But how do you deal with that if you're the government of Canada?
Well, I mean, it shows the way President-elect Trump thinks. He thinks about trade as a zero-sum game. He doesn't seem to either grasp the concept or is refusing to grasp the concept or has a very feeble grasp of the concept of trade. Like, they buy a lot of our stuff, which brings up a really interesting point if you're on our side of the negotiating table. The Wall Street Journal had some very interesting statistics today about what they do buy from us, and it's everything from French fries to fuel. So when you think about what decides elections in the United States, it's gasoline and groceries. It's housing. So what would go up if Mr. Trump actually did go ahead with these tariffs? Well, lumber would go up. The cost of housing would go up. Gasoline would go up. Groceries would go up because they buy a lot of baked goods. Who knew that French fries were one of our greatest exports to the United States? But according to the Wall Street Journal, French fries are a trade weapon for us.
The McCains probably had an
So what we would have is not a free trade agreement, but a free pain agreement. There would be pain on both sides of the border. And I think sooner or later, President Trump is going to realize that, and we're going to work together to get him what he really wants out of this, which is a flex and a win, the appearance of a win.
So Vandana, you were in the PMO, I believe, during Trump 1, right? So I listened to the Prime Minister there saying not to freak out, and this kind of reminds me of the stance the government took during the first round of the NAFTA renegotiations of they learned to respond to Trump's actions rather than his words, when a lot of people overreact to every utterance and every social media post. Does the shortened time frame and the specific nature of this threat maybe change how you approach it, or can you continue to do that steady and slow approach to things?
I think what he means by steady and slow is also showing a unity in the Canadian position. You see he's talking to opposition leaders, to premiers. I would say like a lot of premiers, he's met with them, and a bit of a Team Canada approach, because dealing with Trump isn't just talking to him. That is one piece, building a strong relationship. It's about who also influences him. Find out who those influences are, which most of us, I mean, by then they usually do. So industry, governors, people that are aligned with him, people that have his ear. So big industry is saying that, hey, this is going to cripple this. This is going to cripple that. This is going to be bad for my constituents. He does exactly what Rob says, want a flex. So I think the shortened time period is more about how do we ensure that he gets a bit of his win, so that he can have his political posture and position his government, but also showcase to him and demonstrate that what can cripple yourself, should you, and that we will take those actions.
So Lisa, how do you give Trump a win without capitulation? You know what I mean? From the Canadian side of things. Like, I know they went to dinner, they're talking choppers and drones and officers on the border. I mean, how do you give a win when he goes on NBC and doubles down on everything?
It's a really interesting dilemma that the prime minister and the government has right now, because they want to put out their best foot forward in talking about why it is that Canada shouldn't be punished by a 25% tariff. At the same time, they're going to have to reassure Canadians the fact that if they do something in reaction to that tariff, that they're not capitulating. And I don't know whether or not you can have your cake and eat it too. But I do think that it's important to note what Mr. Poilievre is saying and how he is framing it. And I think it's a good way to frame it for the Conservatives, which is, look, we're in this mess because of the way you've been running the country for the last 10 years. And now you're attempting to fix it in the very last minute. I'm wondering whether or not that's something that Canadians are going to be thinking about as they're watching this government grapple with something that's really important. It makes sense to me that Trudeau would try to make sure that this is a Team Canada effort in order to fix the problem. But Mr. Poilievre saying, but it's a Team Trudeau problem that caused it in the first place.
Brad, is that an accurate analysis, the opposition argument there, that this is the Trudeau government's fault as opposed to the whims of the president-elect?
No. No, I think it's unfair. I think we have a trade surplus with the United States because we sell them our stuff, to Rob's point. That didn't start with Justin Trudeau, and it won't stop if the government changes in 2025. That's the economic reality between our two countries. So it is unfair about that. In terms of, I'm not surprised that he doubled down. And you could, I think, in that NBC interview, you could also see what he's looking for, and that is when he was bragging at how quickly Trudeau went down to Florida to meet with the president-elect. He took bragging rights to that, saying, "Look at me! I'm not even in office yet, and I'm already making foreign countries change their domestic policies, and I'm capturing their attention." So clearly that is what motivates him versus the realities, because he clearly doesn't understand what a trade deficit or trade surplus is, and he doesn't understand what a subsidy is. I don't think he truly understands what a tariff is, but that's going to have to be beside the point for the short term. I think that the actions that need to be taken have to be measurable. That is, we need to be able to point to changes that we've made based on what Trump has asked for. By and large, I mean, I don't think the majority of Canadians are going to be opposed to some of these measures, i.e. tightening up our borders, particularly when there's a great threat that we're going to see migration head north when Trump begins some of his threatened policies. But I also would suggest that Trudeau should also approach it from not a position of weakness by just rhetorically saying don't panic, but also saying, okay, Mr. Trump, we understand that you've got an issue with fentanyl. Your advisors that are around you have a particular policy area that you're concerned with fentanyl and securing the borders. Now, here's our list as well. So we can take some measures to support that which I think most Canadians would want to see movement on anyways, that happens to correlate with what Trump's talking about. But also maybe from a position of strength, start talking about the things that we would like to see out of our ongoing relationship. I think those would kind of help in the next 6 weeks that we have before he takes office.
Rob, I wonder, I feel Bob Canute, the Premier of Manitoba, kind of bottom-lined it pretty good after the first ministers' meeting. We said we can't argue our way out of this, right? You saw in the interview, he was asked, Donald Trump was, whether he could guarantee that prices wouldn't go up. He's like, no, I can't guarantee tomorrow. I can't guarantee anything. And I wonder, he can't run again by law as it exists today.
Right.
So he isn't running again. So if there are tariffs and there is some short-term pain, he doesn't feel that politically necessarily for his future ambitions, right? So does this make him a more difficult negotiating adversary this time around than in the first presidency?
You're saying beware the man who has nothing to lose?
Yeah, very much so.
I do think he has something to lose, though. He is the man who, look, he's done some extraordinary things. He's turned the Republican Party inside out and reinvented it in its own name. He's a man who's been convicted of felonies. Didn't matter. He's a man who insulted his former standard bearers of his own party. didn't matter. He has created what is the Republican Party today. If you create something, let's say a news bureau, for instance, you want that to endure, right? You want that to go ahead. You want that some of those values to go ahead. And I think it's the same with the political movement. And he's going to want those things to go ahead. What we have to understand here is that this is just the beginning. I think that's what he said at the Fox News Awards the night before he went to France. He, as Brad said, the standard for success for him was the alacrity with which Justin Trudeau jetted down to Mar-a-Lago. That was a win for him. Okay, so it's not necessarily what the outcome of these negotiations are, but the notion that he can actually motivate people to do something like that quickly just on his whim. So what did he say during these Fox News Awards on Thursday night? That this is just the beginning. We need to prepare for this to be his MO for the next 4 years and plan accordingly. And as Brad said, what's our list? You want something done about fentanyl? We want something done about the guns coming north from the United States. You want something done about border? We want something done about making sure that the 13 million are not going to come into Canada. It's fair ball, and he is a guy who wrote The Art of the Deal. He just wants to look like he's the guy who won.
Well, yeah, Ghost wrote The Art of the Deal. He had a ghostwriter for Art of the Deal. I mean, it's just to give a shout out to ghostwriters everywhere, because they do a hard job and never get credit for it. But Vandana, on that, the fentanyl flows are so small. The people flows are relatively small compared to what you see at the southern border with Mexico. Mm-hmm. The issue of guns and the potential migration coming north, should he go ahead with the mass deportation threat, could be quite large, right? So like I go back to Canoe's, we can't argue our way out of this. Is that arguing if you come up and say, here's our list of demands as well? Because the 25% tariff threat is not a symmetrical consequence, it seems.
I think he's proving a point. I think he means you need to show something of what you're going to do to retaliate, what's going to be the expense on your end of things that will make you, to what Rob said, not look like the winner you want to look like. So I think that's the point. I think that's a fair concern. I do feel that the government is fortifying that right now with what they're doing with immigration and to make sure that they're showing that it's not easy to come to Canada. But I do think they'll make that as part of their deal as well, making sure that, we don't want guns coming up and we don't want to get the brunt of what you're doing in terms of mass migration.
Right. So, Lisa, you mentioned what the way the Conservatives are approaching this, saying that this is a Canadian problem because of the way Team Trudeau has conducted itself. But we've sort of seen the sketchy factual foundation of the claims the president-elect has made here in terms of, the symmetrical threats to Canada and Mexico when the vast scale of the problem is coming from the southern border. If Pierre Poilievre wins the next election and inherits the Donald Trump challenge, he's also going to have to deal with the fact that the president-elect is a bit mercurial and sort of makes demands that are not necessarily based on a solid foundation. So how does he approach that should he become the next Prime Minister of Canada?
Yeah, with caution, I think is the modification. But I would say this: I thought that Alex Panetta from CBC did a really great job of talking to somebody from inside Trump's world and getting their perspective on what they think the fentanyl problem is with Canada. Because obviously, you're correct on the numbers; it is minuscule compared to Mexico. So, what is it that's bothering the Americans so much? And from what I read in the article, it has to do with the fact that they're worried about organized crime taking hold in Canada, that it's just the beginning, that there's money laundering happening in here, that there are people coming in through the Canadian border that is seeking to do business and send it down to the United States with fentanyl, and that we don't necessarily have the criminal laws that are punishable like they are in the United States. And that there is a problem that's just starting to happen. And they want to nip it in the bud. And they want to make sure that that front that they're already fighting in the South doesn't open in the North. And I think those are all valid things. What does it take in order to make sure that Mr. Trump is satisfied? I think it goes back to the stuff that Pierre's talking about. He is talking about strengthening the criminal code. He is talking about strengthening the border security. He is talking about making sure that immigration makes sense for Canadians. And those are things that do, I think, lend to the criticism of the current government, that we are in this situation for the reasons that I just gave. We're soft on crime. We allowed way too many people come into the country without the appropriate vetting. And we don't have necessarily the security measures at the border to ensure that we're not doing the kinds of importation that they're worried about. So I think that we can tell them until we're blue in the face that we're only exporting 16 kilograms. We're not, as it said in the article, it's not about a kid going across a border with a backpack full of fentanyl. These are sophisticated, organized crime rings that are setting up in Canada that the Americans know about, and they're worried about it, and we should act appropriately.
Okay, we got to leave it there. I think we'll talk more about Donald Trump between now and January 20th.
Can you guarantee American families won't pay more?
I can't guarantee anything. I can't guarantee tomorrow. But I can say that if you look at just pre-COVID, we had the greatest economy in the history of our country. And I had a lot of tariffs on a lot of different countries, but in particular China. We took in hundreds of billions of dollars, and we had no inflation.
Trump said these tariffs will be imposed unless action is taken on the border, saying, quote, drugs are pouring in at levels never seen before. So how should Canada respond? Well, Sandy Silvers, the former Premier of Yukon, and was the chair of the Council of the Federation while the NAFTA negotiations kicked off during Trump's first administration, and he joins me now. Sandy Silvers, good to see you again.
Hi, David. How are you, sir?
I'm good, sir. The Prime Minister said today, one of the most important things for us to do is not to freak out, not to panic over the tariff threats. You agree?
Yeah, I mean, to draw parallels, this is the art of the deal 2.0, and, we need to learn from the last round of negotiations. There was a lot of red herrings on the table. There was also a lot of things that we didn't think would stick that did stick. So we have the opportunity to take a look at some revisionist history. The new NAFTA back at that time, which is the way we were talking about it, was an opportunity to modernize. So with all of the manufactured chagrin that's coming out of the president's mouth, we could also use this as an opportunity to maybe accomplish the things that USMCA didn't accomplish the last time.
It's a weird situation, though, this time, Sandy Silver, because this isn't even the NAFTA renegotiation, which doesn't even start until 2026, right? This is a whole separate thing about the border and fentanyl and human flows. So, I mean, what do you make of the political dynamic in terms of a unified Canadian approach now compared to last time?
Yeah, it's definitely a different world. We had a newly minted president, and also a prime minister that was still in the honeymoon stage. That's for sure. So it was different times. I'll channel my inner Doug Ford, my good friend Premier Doug Ford. At that time, he was doing an interview with the Canadian American Business Council. Him and Scott Moe had junket themselves to go down and to explain the importance of trade in their regions. But at that time, he sent a message out to both the Prime Minister and the opposition parties federally to say now is not the time to play partisan politics. Now is the time. This is too important for Canada, too important for the nation and for both nations to make sure that we got a good deal done. So those are really good mantra to start with when we go down this road.
Well, what do you make of the outreach that the premiers are doing to this point that we've seen? Because this is something everyone, you and others were encouraged to reach out last time to any allies you had south of the border. That's been the same request as you mentioned this time. We've seen Doug Ford and Daniel Smith go on Fox News. Ontario's running ads. Vic Fedeli is in Washington today. I mean, what do you make of the response you're seeing from premiers right now?
Yeah, obviously they've learned from past negotiations. When we went down in June of 2017, we all know inauguration in the States happened in January of that year. We were underwhelmed with the amount of staff that were actually in the Oval Office. The number that was given to us was it was about 10 to 15% of the people that needed to be hired, the gears, the cogs, the grease to make things work just weren't there. And so, after all these conversations with the Lighthouser, on a national level, we went down and were underwhelmed at that office. So we went to Borders Patrol, we went to the Chambers of Commerce, we went to the state level representatives, Homeland Security, because we knew that once the capacity in the Oval Office got up to snuff, these will be the voices that will be extremely important, and these are the voices that need some CanCon, some Canadian content in it. So again, all beacons freaking, making sure we have all of the communication necessary to explain. And again, our theme last time was we are the insulation in the attic. You don't notice it's there until it's gone. And so, every premier now would have a better idea of who that targeted audience is for their region. And I applaud their efforts to make sure they get that message out about the importance of trade with Canada.
Look, the virtue of that approach, I think, was evident in the way the negotiations ended up, right? That you ended up as a team with a lot of allies on the U.S. side of the border who saw the merits of the free trade arrangement and wanted to see it survive in a more modernized way. But it's fundamentally different this time around in that you don't have that kind of runway, you don't have that kind of horizon. We're looking at like 40 days or whatever it is until the 20th of January, which is the deadline for the threat. So what do you make of the distinct differences in the realities facing us this time around as a country compared to last time?
Yeah, a lot of it is very similar, but a lot of it is extremely different. It really, really is. I guess as opposed to trying to compare two situations that really have no comparison, it's more about what did we learn the last time. And what we went from this dialogue of NAFTA was a camaraderie. It was a three amigos approach to creating a free trade system in North America. The new USMCA. It was not that at all. It was kind of like it could have been worse was the final kind of thought on that. I remember the ambassador at that time, David McNaughton, saying, if we don't get the tariffs on steel and aluminum off of the table, then we should probably take a low-level government official from Ottawa with a bag on his head to sign the agreement. So we moved forward from that day in Argentina, the last day of before the president of Mexico ended his term. But there was things that we really hoped we could accomplish at that time that we didn't. And what we saw when it came to we solved a lot of the 20th century issues, but a lot of the 21st century issues were still on the table. Intellectual property, for drugs came in, and that was a protectionism. So that really caused a lot of trouble to healthcare. Intellectual property, 70 years for a natural human, a natural person, 75 years for corporates. That delayed a whole generation of creative contact. Making film from the written word. So we had this opportunity as well on the digital side of things to really take a look at the digital economy. We had some localization of data that was important for trade that was accomplished through the first round. But this is an international conversation. The digitalization economy has to be secure. We've seen time and time and again in the last few years, cybersecurity threats. So we really didn't have the wherewithal maybe during the first negotiations of USMCA. Those things need to be back on the table now to make sure that we have trade commitments nationally, internationally that can accomplish what we might not have had enough runway for last time around.
But for whatever happens in the next phase of the NAFTA review starting in 2026, this tariff threat's got to be resolved in a way that it doesn't happen, right? I mean, do you see it that way, in that it's almost impossible to go in any kind of a realistic negotiation with the incoming president if there's a 25% tariff on everything that crosses the border into the U.S.?
Yeah, again, it's the first few chapters of the art of the deal, right? And it's very similar last time around. Section 232, that security, national security issue on our auto industry, big red herring. And so just avoid the red herrings, try to get the conversation somewhere that makes sense for all jurisdictions. This was the attempt last time. It was using a trade agreement to increase the market share for one country out of three. And hopefully we have enough data to prove that, a North American approach that floats all boats would be extremely wise, long-term thinking in a modern age. And so hopefully it gets to that. But again, it's not much different as far as the MO of the president this time versus last time. Avoid those red herrings and stick to the points that matter the most.
So just as a final point, Sandy, still very optimistic that Canada and Mexico can find a way to satisfy these demands in the time available until the announced deadline of January 20th. Who knows with Donald Trump? This may just hang over both countries forever as long as he's there. I mean, do you think there's enough runway to get something done?
That's a tight timeline. I know that the president has probably more motivation to get his staff up and running at a quicker time frame than the last time around. It's a different president this time, but it'll be interesting to see if we can adhere to that deadline. But more important to the fact is, Team Canada, right? And, it's not necessarily our direct federal to federal. They'll do the negotiation. I have ultimate faith in the federal ministers and prime minister to do their part of the job. But what's really, really important is that minutia, right? It's the granular approach on an everyday working state legislators, utilizing agencies like PNWR, the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, that has coordinated efforts between local governments on both sides of the border and private sector, really having all of our agencies, all of our elected officials, all rowing in the same direction. That's the best way we can accomplish the goals that are set out in front of us.
Sandy Silver, former Premier of Yukon. Always appreciate the time. It's good to speak with you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, David.